Cammy White's fighting game debut was as a new playable character in Super Street Fighter II: The New Challengers, and to say that she's gone on to become popular would be one hell of an understatement. In New Challengers and Super Turbo, she's a part of the military unit Delta Red. She joins the tournament after feeling drawn to it somehow when learning that Bison was the person holding the tournament. She soon discovers that she also is a clone of Bison, and was brainwashed to work as an assassin for Shadaloo in the past. Thankfully, with the encouragement of her Delta Red unit, she leaves this in the past and continues to forge her own future. Unlike nearly every other Street Fighter character, the Versus games actually do play something of a significant role in how Cammy's backstory was revealed to players. She appears as a playable character in the first Versus game, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, but is very notably not using her original design, but instead a new at-the-time outfit meant to depict her time as a Shadaloo agent codenamed Killer B. Cammy was one of several dolls, brainwashed young women kidnapped from across the entire globe and trained to serve as an army of enforcers for Bison. Cammy is depicted in X-Men vs. Street Fighter as subservient to Bison, who even appears in one of her win poses, with her saluting him. About a year later in Street Fighter 02 Dash, or Alpha 2 Gold as it's known outside of Japan, this incarnation of Cammy would debut in Street Fighter proper, albeit as a hidden character with very limited usage. She could only be used in training and Versus modes in the Sega Saturn version, and on PS1 she can only be used in Versus mode. However, if you play Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold on PS2 via the Alpha Anthology, she's fully implemented as a playable character in that version in every mode, complete with her own arcade ladder, optional rival fight, final boss, and ending. As an aside, the PS2 version of Alpha 2 Gold is incredibly interesting. Instead of being a straight PS1 or Saturn port, they completely overhauled it so that it looks and performs identically to the arcade versions of Alpha 2. All the animations that were cut from previous home ports were restored, along with restoring the arcade version's voice clip quality, and this version also allows you to even backport some quality of life changes from Alpha 3 over to this game, like the strength of supers being tied to button strength instead of numbers of buttons being pressed as Alpha 2 usually does it. It's an unsung port that someone really needs to do a deep dive video on at some point. Hell, I might do it in the future. Cammy's voice actor in the Versus games, with the exception of Capcom vs. SNK 2, is Susan Hart, who also voiced Marrow in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. She doesn't have very many voice acting credits past those two roles, but there's a good reason for that. She transitioned from voice acting to voice casting, and then to voice direction from there, where the majority of her body of work lies. Voice direction is honestly one of the more unsung roles when it comes to dubbing in media. A good voice director can be the difference between Final Fantasy XII cutscenes and Kingdom Hearts cutscenes. That said, there's a good bit to talk about here overall, so let's get started. Perhaps to distinguish Cammy from her New Challengers appearance, she has an entirely new theme for X-Men vs. Street Fighter, being the only character on the Street Fighter side whose theme isn't a rearrangement of a prior theme. It's fast-paced and kind of hectic, but it definitely works for an assassin that'll clap you before you even know she's there. Interestingly enough, this theme gets a rearrangement in Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, marking one of, if not the only time a Street Fighter theme borrows from the Versus games instead of the other way around. This is something that's going to become a theme in this video, since her mainline counterpart would end up borrowing one or two things from her appearance in this game. In Ryu's video, I talked about how the Marvel and Tatsunoko Versus entries buff up the Capcom characters so that they can be on more even footing with the literal superheroes on the other half of the roster. In Cammy's case, she's made much faster. Her ground dash is up there with Magneto as one of the fastest in the game. More interestingly though, all of her moves seem to be infused with Psycho Power, which manifests as a blue flame in the majority of her attacks. I think that's a pretty great call that gives her an edge here that she didn't previously have, while also contextualizing what she'd have access to as one of Bison's Shadaloo dolls. Two birds, one stone. Cammy, first and foremost, has a double jump in this game. Her first special move is Cannon Drill, done with a quarter circle forward and kick, and can be done in the air. This move had a pretty weird naming thing going on in the 90s. The move name was originally Spiral Arrow, but they changed it for the international releases of New Challengers and Super Turbo, and X-Men vs. Street Fighter and later Marvel 2 retained that name. Street Fighter will revert back to Spiral Arrow as the move name internationally, starting with Alpha 3. I'll be going with the move names as they're officially referred to in each game. Her second move, and arguably her most iconic, is Cannon Spike, done with a Dragon Punch motion and kick. This one also had a different name at one point, as it was originally localized as Thrust Kick. Capcom pretty quickly switched gears to Cannon Spike instead, and smartly so. Cannon Spike would end up becoming the namesake of a Saikyo developed overhead shooter that would star Cammy alongside some other original characters and other additional cameos like Charlie, Arthur, and even Mega Man. Street Fighter V also pays homage to that game by having unlockable alternate costumes for Charlie and Cammy based on the designs in that game. They even have special dialogue in certain cases. Next is Axel Spin Knuckle, done with a quarter circle forward and punch. The punch stref dictating the distance Cammy travels. She's had this since New Challengers. Next is Cannon Revenge, done with a half circle back and punch. This is a new move made specifically for this game. Cammy takes a defensive stance, and if she's hit during it, she automatically counters with a Cannon Spike. This move would later make an appearance in mainline Street Fighter games in Alpha 3. Next is another move made for this game, Cannon Strike, done with a quarter circle back and kick in the air. Cammy would later get this in Alpha 3 as well, though unlike Cannon Revenge, it remains a part of her legacy moveset to this very day. So if you hate that she has a dive kick in Street Fighter these days, blame Marvel, baby. Small tangent, but her EX variant of this in Street Fighter 4 may be a shout out to this maneuver from the Street Fighter 2 V animation. Next up is Cammy's Hooligan combination, done with a quarter circle back and kick. Like in New Challengers where it originated, she has several follow-ups that can be done. Pressing medium or heavy kick when not in front of or on top of the opponent cancels the maneuver. Pressing them near an opponent's head initiates Fatal Leg Twister. Pressing them near an opponent's body closer to the ground initiates Cross Scissor Pressure. And not pressing anything after has Cammy return to the ground with Razor Edge Slicer, a sliding kick attack. Cammy's first hyper combo is Spin Drive Smasher, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 kicks. This one's taken from Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Her next hyper combo is Killer Bee Assault, done with a quarter circle back and 2 kicks. This can be done in the air as well. This hyper combo is incredibly similar to Spider-Man's Maximum Spider Super from Marvel Superheroes, though Cammy ended with a Cross Scissor Pressure. Cammy would later get this in Street Fighter Alpha 3. She doesn't have it in any other mainline Street Fighter game, but the first bit of Cammy's critical art in Street Fighter V seems like a deliberate shout out to it. Here are Cammy's colors in the original arcade release of the game. And here are her exclusive colors in the Sega Saturn port of the game. And here's Cammy's ending. Looking at that ending for Cammy in the previous game is interesting, because at that point in time, we didn't have a canonical explanation for how Cammy went from being one of Bison's dolls to a Delta Red operative. It's neat that in the context of the Versus games at least, Psylocke is the one who helps rescue her, but What about mainline Street Fighter? We'd end up getting an answer in Street Fighter Alpha 3, where Cammy manages to regain her independence and defies Bison, freeing all of her fellow dolls from his control before the base explodes. In Cammy's ending, her fate is left ambiguous. However, Vega's ending reveals that he rescued Cammy from the exploding base, as he thought her too beautiful to die in that manner, and left her to be eventually found by Delta Red. Cammy's Alpha 3 inclusion forms the basis of her appearance in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Because Alpha 3 Cammy borrowed so largely from her X-Men vs. Street Fighter incarnation, she still retains many of her abilities from both games, but she gets a few changes here and there. Her hooligan follow-ups have been changed a bit. Pressing punch during a hooligan initiates Fatal Leg Twister. She loses cross scissor pressure, but instead gains Cannon Strike as a follow-up by simply pressing kick. Cammy would gain this in mainline Street Fighter from Ultra Street Fighter 4 onwards as a hooligan follow-up. Not pressing anything, as always, still results in Razor Edge Slicer. Cannon Drill is also super cancelable now, allowing Cammy to more easily combo into Killer B Assault. Cammy also gains her new super from Alpha 3 as a hyper combo, Reverse Shaft Breaker. The Marvel version is faster, it travels a lot higher than in Alpha 3. Cammy's first assist is Cannon Spike.
Lock on! Lock on!
This is one of the better anti-air assists in the game and the preferred choice for her. Her second assist is Cannon Drill.
Cannon Drill! Lock on!
Her final assist is Axel Spin Knuckle.
Come on. Lock on!
And here are all of Cammy's colors. Cammy still retains her Killer B persona in the Capcom vs. SNK games, likely out of necessity given the reused assets and all. Like other characters migrating from the Marvel games, she's pared back down to Street Fighter levels, but given how closely linked her alpha moveset is to the Versus games, she doesn't actually lose very much in the transition. This is also the first Versus game to go with the Spiral Arrow naming for her quarter circle forward kick attack.
Spiral Arrow!
Axel Spin Knuckle is still here, but it reverts to its Street Fighter input of a half circle back and punch. Hooligan combination also reverts to its more complex Street Fighter input as well. She keeps Fatal Leg Twister, done with its original Street Fighter input during Hooligan. And she gets back cross scissor pressure as well, also done with the original Street Fighter input. She loses the Cannon Strike Hooligan follow-up she had in Marvel 2, and Cannon Strike altogether actually, at least initially. More on that in a sec. It bears mentioning that Cannon Revenge also gets dropped in this game, Marvel 2 being the last time she officially has it. The setup for her Ultra 2 and Super Street Fighter 4 might be a shout out to it though, being a counter super that starts with her taking a vaguely similar pose to the one she takes in Cannon Revenge. Cammy retains Spin Drive Smasher as her primary super in the game.
Lock on! Spin Drive Smasher!
Cammy's unlockable EX variant in the vanilla release of Capcom vs. SNK changes her a bit. For one, she now has Cannon Strike, done with its usual input, and she also has the Cannon Strike Hooligan follow-up from Marvel 2 restored, with the same input from that game as well. She also gets reverse shaft breaker back from Alpha 3 and Marvel 2.
Targeting!
There's one big caveat though. She loses two moves in particular, her spin knuckle and most notably, Spiral Arrow. Suffice to say, a version of Cammy without Spiral Arrow proved to be immensely unpopular. So much so that in the updated re-release of the game, Capcom vs SNK Pro, her EX form was readjusted. While she still loses Spin Knuckle, she gets back Spiral Arrow, though she loses Hooligan altogether. Here are all of Cammy's colors in Capcom vs SNK 1 Pro. Like every other returning character in Capcom vs SNK 2, Cammy's moveset is a unification of her normal and EX forms from Capcom vs SNK 1. So, Spiral Arrow, Hooligan, Cannon Strike, and Reverse Shaft Breaker are all here among standbys like Cannon Strike, Spin Knuckle, and Spin Drive Smasher. Cammy actually has a new voice actor in CVS too, Miki Nagasawa, who has done a good bit of VA work, though the roles I'm most familiar with is Duat in Tales of Vesperia and all associated crossover Tales appearances, Maya in Neon Genesis Evangelion, and Leo Hayakawa in Princess 9. There's admittedly not much to talk about regarding Cammy's moveset itself in this game. Cammy's generally considered to place pretty highly in character rankings, usually being placed just on the cusp of the top tiers. She has character interactions with the whole roster, but because this game leans into the cold, emotionless assassin characterization for her, perhaps harder than just about any other Capcom fighter, there's not much in the way of standalone dialogue. There's a fun bit of special dialogue she has if she's on a team with Hibiki that involves an antiquated Japanese turn of phrase. But I've decided to save that for the eventual Hibiki video instead, since that'd arguably be more fitting for her, being from the distant past and all. Here are all of Cammy's colors. You know, while I knew that Cammy borrowed from the Versus games a bit more than other Street Fighter characters, I didn't realize just how much of her Versus series appearances actually shaped the character she'd become in Street Fighter today. Other characters, notably Charlie, also got some Versus series DNA in their Street Fighter kits, but Cammy's is the one that's done it the most, and awfully subtly too. Some of her tools, like Hooligan and the Cannon Strike, feel so natural that they almost seem like they were always part of her Street Fighter arsenal. I think her implementation in the Versus games are also a testament to just how popular the Alpha games were at the time. When people think of Killer Bee Cammy, they almost always think of either Alpha 3 or the Versus games. She'd go on to become a staple Street Fighter character, never really missing the base roster of every Street Fighter game from 4 onwards, though she did miss the initial arcade release of Street Fighter 4. She'd also occasionally pop up in crossovers as well, notably in Namco Cross Capcom and Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and yes, I'll be covering the latter at some point. Maybe even the former if I can find the time to beat it. I also want to give a big shout out to her Street Fighter 6 design. It's a sensibly designed outfit that represents Cammy's country of origin, and also preserves her distinctive character silhouette. While Cammy was always pretty badass, it makes Cammy look cool in a way that I don't quite think she's ever been before. Cammy's my favorite Street Fighter character, so I might be biased, but I definitely think her design in 6 is one of the greatest character redesigns in the genre. That said, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks as always for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.